Welcome to Definitely Maybe Agile, the podcast where Peter Maddison and David Sharrock discuss the complexities of adopting new ways of working at scale. Hello, Dave. How are you today?
Peter, great to catch up. So, how are things? What are we going to talk about today?
Today, we're going to talk about token economics because, well, that sounds so fun.
So, the phrase itself just brings that little bit of like, really, we've got to talk about money and accounting and numbers and things like this. So, and there's loads of conversations right now, discussions around token maximization and the rumors going around of various companies spending millions and millions of dollars unexpectedly as they are shifting or being shifted to a consumption-based model rather than.
So I would frame it like this. I would say that, and I'm sure that we can find a lot of this online, but earlier in the year, or at least the last few years, we've been living in this paradise where you could pay $20 per user and get unlimited, well, not unlimited, but limited access to enough tokens that would enable you, and a token effectively being the unit of currency for engaging with an AI. Let's call it that for a simplistic way of describing it. I'm happy to have a more detailed conversation about what a token is, but the idea there is that where tokens translate to the amount of AI that you're going to be using or consuming to do AI driven. And we had this wonderful idea that we could budget for our company as $20 times number of engineers or people that you have that you want to give access to these tools. And that would basically be your budget. So the CFO goes, that sounds great. This is how much money I need. Then, of course, the AI companies realize, well, oh, no, we're not making any money anymore. In fact, we weren't really ever making any money in a lot of cases. And we need to generate more revenue, and we can't keep charging a fixed price cost when some users are using astronomically more. So we need to switch to what we would call a consumption-based model. And during the previous period of the $20 fixed cost era, you had this concept of token maxing that you brought up before, which was basically there was a drive in companies to use as many tokens as you can because that shows that you are doing things with AI, and doing things with AI immediately means that you are going to be generating value for the company. In the same way as, you put 100 monkeys in a room and you'll create Shakespeare. It's the same conceptual idea, just lots and lots of noise.
The more people using more cycles of AI, the more likely make that transition to some sort of AI native organization.
And then we hit
logic,
the first
but a KPI, right?
Yes. And then we hit the 1st of June, Microsoft, well, they announced it before that, but as of the 1st of June in 2026, they announced that they would shift to this consumption-based model, which immediately threw all of this up in the air. And we've kind of gone from token maxing to token minning, if you like. So it's like reduce the number of tokens, quick, because all of a sudden we've got this hockey stick curve as people are starting to consume more and more tokens. And we're still, through all of this, not necessarily seeing the value at the other end. There you go. I'm going to put it in.
But so as you're describing that, the thing that jumped into I'm sitting in my apartment right now, and I'm just thinking about, we have a conversation going on in our strata about the building I'm in has to put a water meter.
Mm-hmm.
And until now, they've not had a water meter, and everybody can kind of use the water that they want to use, and it's a flat fee, and that's great. And obviously, the building is fighting getting a water meter put in place, because the moment you put the water meter in place, you're paying for usage, you're not just paying for access. And what's interesting, and I think the thing that all I'm thinking of is there are people who take long showers, who spend ages and ages using lots and lots of water. And then there are people who nip in, have a quick shower, and they're out again, and that's it. And of course, now what an organization has to figure out is metaphorically who takes really, really long showers and is using all of those tokens up excessively, potentially, or who might be doing the right thing, as in they're using water because they need it in that metaphor.
Well, I think there was always this fallacy that was built into that. And the fallacy was this idea that if you use more AI, you produce more value. And there was this equation that didn't necessarily make sense. And in fact, one of the things, and it's been in various articles in the paper, and I know from multiple organizations, I've seen the same thing where it's like 10% of the users using 50% of the cost. It's actually kind of, in some ways, you could almost think it would be surprising that it would so consistently see this happen again and again across multiple different organizations in different industries. Although there is a certain logic to it that the early adopters are the ones who are going to jump on this and use it.
There's a couple of things that are coming out just as we look through this. Number one is this poor use of KPIs, because I think in an organization that has no AI usage, measuring AI usage as some sort of like, are we shifting in the right direction, kind of makes sense. It's a proxy for we're beginning to, explore and play around with this new technology. But the moment you move to a somewhat familiar organization that is using AI in a number of different ways, that KPI is now useless. In fact, it drives poor behavior right out of the gate. So there's just that whole point of the KPI needs to be applied. And we've talked about this many, many times, but it needs to be relevant to the problem that the behavior you're trying to change. But the other side is that 10%, if we just use averages and we go after the 10% that have 50% of the usage, that's not necessarily solving the problem, because some of those 10% might well be having a tremendous impact. And therefore, they're leveraging many, many more tokens than the average across the organization, but the return that they're achieving could be outsized. And then there'll be other kind of part of that population that isn't making good use of the tokens that they are burning.
Yes, and then that's kind of the piece, right, where you have to go ask. You have to, identify who that 10% is and ask them. Like, yeah. It's go interview them, find out, well, what have you been doing with all of these tokens? Like, what have you been building? What have you seen? What have you?
I'm not even sure it's as simple as talking to the people using those tokens, because we talked again about value recognition all the time, and value and impact is a very difficult thing in many cases to measure. There are scenarios where it's relatively straightforward, but most of the organizations, certainly you and I work with, struggle to understand where value, they're looking for a simple metric that determines where the value is created, and reality is they're in a complex, multi-dimensional way of creating value, and it's difficult to tell.
I think the piece there is that talk to the people first, because you might find out what it is they've been working on. What have they been using the tokens for? They've been building business features, or have they been taking the most expensive model they can and applying it to all the mundane tasks, and they've just never bothered turning it off?
Because they're writing emails using Mythos or Fable.
Yeah. And in which case they're going to burn through a lot of tokens, and they could have used a smaller, simpler model, which gets you into this concept of, I agree with you that the ultimate goal is to be able to say, okay, what value did this token produce? Yeah. How can I equate the spend that I'm generating to the value I'm creating for the organization? Is there a connection between these two? And that piece, I think, is where the art comes in, where it's looking for what the CFO is looking for is, hey, I went from a fixed cost to a variable cost, and it's going through the roof. And now I really need to know what is this spend producing? What is the value I'm creating?
But what's in? I think there's a couple of things. One is you need to have sight on that spend. So as a CFO, the first thing is who's monitoring? How are we capping usage? How are we preventing these stories that we're hearing about multiple millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars, or it depends on the stories you read, but it's a lot of money being spent unexpectedly because presumably the consumption is not being tracked and it's not capped. There's some basic administration that.
Yes, there's some basic controls that should be in place to say, hey, how much can you spend up to before you need to go ask? And then also some cultural pieces around that, and other parts of it around what needs to be true for me to up those limits. Who gets the extra money, and what does that look like overall? Because I need to be able to see where is that money going.
And so that becomes the second bit, which is how is value being created? What's the impact of
Mhm.
that spend, and where can you track it? This has been seen before. I mean, with the shift to the cloud and various other, there's a lot of these different steps. So it's a journey that many executives will have experienced beforehand.
Yeah, it's like, am I increasing my top line? Am I reducing my bottom line? Am I
Yeah,
managing risk? That is
cool.
100,000 foot view, but the simplest way of
Yeah.
thinking. But those then break down into different pieces. How are these the tokens that are being consumed being spent to the benefit of the organization?
And I think this is one of the things that jumps to mind when I think of these problems is the tendency of sort of flattening the view just to look at averages and look at, say, for example, just token spend by individual and making a decision as to how to manage that based on the usage per individual, rather than understanding there's another thing to look at, which is what's the impact of that work and how do you tie those together? And that's not straightforward. It's not an easy look at one thing to the.
Which brings us into the concept of the honest organization, because for if you are going to go and ask people, and it can't be that you seem to be going to shoot the messenger, if you like, you're
Yeah.
not that you're
Or
not
should the
on a
people
witch
who
hunt.
respond, yeah, the people who responded to the call to use more, to
You
step
ask them.
into the sort of AI world and really become familiar with it and use it to maximize what they're doing, they're probably many of your highest token users. And yet they're doing exactly what the organization was asking. And then the risk is, if you're not having decent conversations around this, that they're penalized.
Yes, which is not what you want. And no, as we were saying, there can be some people who might need some help understanding how to use the tools better and make more effective use of them and use the right models for the right purposes. But again, that's also a conversation that should be handled
Yeah.
well and openly, so people helps because it's a learning exercise,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's these new tools, new capabilities. They're very powerful. There's a lot of things they can do, but there's a lot of learning that needs to go into how and when to use them in what different ways. So I think
Guidelines
that's
to
a
be put in place and things like this. And it's an interesting one. So I don't see that very frequently. I see a lot of encouragement to use tools and models, but less around guidelines as to how to optimize the usage of the different models.
there's one organization I know of that their organizational policy and the culture put in place essentially says use the minimum model first and only
Okay.
go up from there if
Yeah.
you really have to, like if you need to. So start with the smallest models, and with even that on itself, I mean, that potentially can help.
It's a difficult one. My mind immediately goes to, well, if it's not solving the problem with the smallest model, you're more likely to stop trying. And it almost feels like there's a benefit from starting with the strongest model and then paring it down until you're getting the result that you are happy with once you've proved you can solve the problem.
The problem there, it's the you become addicted to
Yeah.
the reasoning model at the top, that and there's so many places you can go with this. There's a lot of elements to AI, and we haven't really dug into them around caching and temperature and prompting. Like there's lots of things that you can do to change the behavior of these different engines, but you'll there can also be this conceptual idea. If you encourage anyone to use as much tokens as they possibly can, the more expensive models obviously help them do that. So,
Yes. That's another thing that can happen really quickly.
yeah, I think that there's definitely some interesting pieces that we need to think about around how token economics are managed. How do you help an organization then think about, how do I budget? How do I forecast? And we've got tools and frameworks that we help put organizations think about how to do this. And there's a maturity to it, starting with sort of the visibility at the beginning, and then thinking at how do we look above that into how can we look at optimizing the spend or anticipating what we're going to be spending, and think through that to build on top of each of those layers to get better and better at how do we use these tools in the system. But it is, I think of it as a system. I think of it as another part of the delivery system and how that delivery system is set up to succeed. So,
Yeah. I find it's interesting that a year ago and conversations that we had earlier, even within the podcast, focused on things like governance, focused on just these aspects of just setup, if you like. And it's interesting that really we've seen in the last 3 or 4 months this shift to operational guidelines and policies and how to use and optimize the usage of these different models because the cost model changed.
Yes. And it's very interesting in that the companies now have a need, which is also what's driving that too. You need to get a handle on the spend. And we were talking to people about that previously. It's just it wasn't as important as it's now suddenly become.
How do we wrap it up?
So I would wrap it up with there's a couple of key pieces. One is getting a handle on where all the tokens are going, like who's using them, and starting to understand what are they using them for, so that you can appropriately put the right guidelines into place, appropriately govern the system, ensure that you're giving the CFO what they need to be able to run the business, and also ensuring that costs don't spiral out of control as you start to adopt these tools into your environment. So I think that's kind of one of the main pieces. I think the other key piece would be around understanding the value add. It's not just about counting the number of tokens. It's looking at what am I doing with them, right? Like what is the value being created as a part of this, and what part of my organization is that it then impacting? Because without that, then you probably will not get the most out of introducing the technology.
And I think if I'd add anything to that, it's the recognizing if you're working with delivery teams, development teams, or the operational side, is the importance of how you're communicating to the CFO in the examples that we've been using, what's being done across the organization by different teams and individuals. I'm just very conscious of the ease with which a line can be drawn in a table that's ordered based on token usage, for example, and all of a sudden the most interesting, innovative, valuable contributors are getting penalized for trying to really make a difference. And so that understanding there's a nuance there about how to make sure the budgets are being met in the right way.
Yes. Awesome. Well, pleasure to have the conversation as always, Dave. And I look forward to next time. And if you're listening, don't forget to tell your friends and hit subscribe.
Okay, until next time, Peter. Thanks again.
You've been listening to Definitely Maybe Agile, the podcast where your hosts, Peter Maddison and David Sharrock, focus on the art and science of digital, agile, and DevOps at scale.